Welcome back for another edition of The Road to 100, our narrative series here with Black AI Media. I'm Cedric Scott Jr., your host, and I'm joined with, and I mean, it's definitely a heartfelt situation whenever I could talk to fellow educators, within the space and talk about what we're doing. So I have Husan Thompson with me today, and we're going to get into his background, talk about the things that he's doing within the space of tech and including AI. But I want to open it up really quick, Hassan, first and say thank you for joining me, brother. I appreciate you. And give us a little bit of an introduction, background, who you are and what you do.
Sure. So Husan Thompson, I've been a lifelong educator. Was my first career out of college, and I've been front facing with students for about a generation. So my former students could have kids that would be my students. I've had the great pleasure to teach in several states across the country, including Louisiana, Maryland, Virginia, Georgia, and California. I have taught all up and down the science department, non-calculus physics, chemistry, biology, various levels of leadership. I've never gone into admin, but I have been department chair, coach, counselor, and the whole bit. So I've got a big, broad experience in education from special ed, suburban schools, all the way to very deeply urban schools with students who are far below basic and several grades behind. So I've seen the full spectrum and have transitioned to taking that wealth of knowledge and leveraging it to help the next generation of educators and to make my impact on the field itself, because I do think that it's struggling. And I've been party to that. So now I have a level of accountability to speak truth to power and to do what I can to help improve the system, because I've got a lot on the line. I've got an 8-year-old son, and if I look at the statistics, the data doesn't look good for him. In some areas, he's got a 90% chance to be below reading level by the time he gets to 12th grade. So no matter how much skill set I've got as a professional educator, I've got a whole world to combat. So rather than just worry about me and my home, I'm interested in making a bigger impact on the field itself. And so that's a little bit about me and what drives my passion.
We connect on a lot of different points, being fathers, being educators, husbands, all those pieces.
Right.
And with that in mind, as we're talking about now in this context of this conversation, thinking about technology, AI, which is we know is driving into the future, considering our little ones and youth at large and just the world. Our primary question here that I want to ask you is, what does narrative mean to you?
Hmm. When I think of narrative, the first thing that comes up for me is the term griot or griot, depending on where you're from, Griot. It is a term that is used to identify the storyteller of a community. And it could be more than just a storyteller. It is the historian, the keeper of records, the genealogist before these cool bottles that you could spit in and get your DNA. Right? These were the keepers of the history of the story. And in our tradition, an oral tradition is a critical part of how we understand culture and how we understand the world. So when I think of the term narrative, I think, who's telling our story? Who's got custody over the not only the history, but that history then projects out to what's possible in the future. And so for me, having access to that narrative, understanding what is the source of that narrative, and making sure that that tradition continues, it grounds us in a historical context. So for me, transitioning from a boy into a man, and now I'm quickly moving into the elder class, bro. I feel some type of way about that, but it does highlight the level of accountability and responsibility that I have in terms of being a part of what is that narrative, who's responsible for it. And I'm in a position to take at least my portion of responsibility and make sure that we honor that tradition. So that's what comes up for me.
Yeah, some amazing points related to just consideration for generations, right, across age brackets and groups, which is definitely important and imperative for us to lean into.
Mhm.
And with that in mind, I wanted to kind of position this and think, because I know your background, similar to mine, was originally in science, but here we are talking about tech and AI related to the work that we're doing. So, can you tell us about your journey as it pertains to going into more the technological AI based space?
Mm.
How did you get started? Did you tinker with some of the tools and that type of thing? And what led you to kind of where you are today and how you're actually using this technology?
Okay. Well, put your seatbelt on. um, when I think about my journey specifically related to the issue of tech, it probably starts. I mean, I've always been into technology just because of the field that we're in, right? So it's hard to divorce the science from the technology, from the engineering, from the mathematics. So it's been something that I've been connected to since I was a child, playing in my grandmother's garden, watching tomato flowers turn into fruits and, digging up worms and things. But moving into the heart of your question, I probably got professionally serious about leveraging technology more broadly during the pandemic. When we all went home, I realized very quickly that school from home meant that now the quality of our education and our capacity to educate our students was in direct competition to Fortnite and Roblox and PlayStation. And if a child has the option to choose between picking their favorite avatar on Fortnite or listening to Miss Jones, who can't quite use the mute button properly and doesn't know where the cameras and the files are, we're going to lose every time. And so I had to really figure out, what can I do from a digital space that could create a compelling experience for the students, such that they would still want to be engaged in my class rather than put me on mute and mute their video and then go do whatever, just to get credit for the course. So that's when it really started to highlight for me just how far behind we were. And if the best of technology was using Google Classroom and Zoom as the core combination, then I knew that we were fighting a losing battle. Moving forward from there, I started into the tinkering journey. And so it became a lot about, okay, well, what are all the features of Google and how can I integrate them? Then came OpenAI. And you want to talk about a game changer. I mean, OpenAI took the concept of search and customized it in such a way that any person could ask any question and actually get an answer to that question rather than a series of ranked pages where they would then continue to do their own research. So when I think about the implications of what a student could do with a powerful tool like that, which can search the entire internet based on a prompt and synthesize a response to that prompt, which is, 80% or so well done. Given my experience in the minds of young people, oh man, changed the game. But when I started to trumpet this new tool to my fellow educators and in particular to my administrators, it wasn't as well received as I thought. And that's when I started to realize that there is no success without successors. And if our current administrators and leaders in education are so stuck in the way things were and trying to mold the technology to fit into an old way of doing education, then I knew we had no future. And so I then started to move out on my own. I knew that my impact had to go beyond just the classroom and those 30 students that I have for that 90-minute block. And I started to realize that rather than a 30 to 1, I could have a 1 to 1, like this conversation, multiplied by 1,000. And so an individual teacher who understands how to use the technology properly can leverage it in such a way that they're not stretched nearly as thin, that they could use the technology to create a compelling experience where the students get a chance to navigate the World Wide Web. They can use their levels of inquiry to answer questions that are actually interesting to them. And the teacher could do it from the comfort of their own home. Oh man, sign me up.
Thinking about that trajectory and pathway of working in schools and then stepping out and kind of doing your own thing independently, realizing how we can utilize some of these tools, the technology, AI. I want to talk a little bit about the Educators House and what that means to you, that initiative, that that push. Can you give us a little bit of backstory on that particular initiative, what your hopes are for it, and how did it come to life?
The dawn of the Educator's House is very connected to my own personal history. So the original version, if all right, we're gonna go there, huh, Cedric? Okay.
Let's do it.
The original version of Educator's House was called Brain Power. And the concept behind Brain Power was really leveraging my passion for the students. And so I started this as a after school program for students who did not have reasonable access to university life and university experience. So in those first couple of years, we did things like college tours. We would do I don't know if you remember, and I can't think of the term right now, but there was a museum experience back in those days where they would do these really interesting artistic anatomical expositions of all sorts of different things, human bodies, animals, the whole bit. I forget what it was called, but we took a trip out there, so we would be chartering buses and just giving students that beyond the classroom experience. Then I started working at Loyola Marymount University and was serving at the university level, and that then gave me a bit of access to then start bringing middle school and high school students onto the campus for campus tours. And because of my position, I had access to dean levels, chairmen, all kinds of very powerful and interesting people. So then the students started to get access to them. So at that time, Brain Power was very much a student facing, student servicing sort of operation. Then if I fast forward to post pandemic, and I was faced with a decision point. And due to both professional and personal reasons, it just made sense for me to leave the school that I was at. But after, 20 plus years in the classroom, I really had to ask myself, do I want to drive this train towards retirement and potentially become that old fogey teacher that doesn't understand the young folks and all this skibbity toilet, Sigma, Ohio language that they're talking about? Or is it time to go beyond the classroom? And so during the pandemic, I got interested in Clubhouse, as many of our educators did. And when I left the classroom, I went back to Clubhouse. And it was at that time that a friend of mine named Courtney Savoy Harper had a very popular brand called Educators. And the way that it was organized, they were called houses. And so this house called Educators, I just started working with her, and she gave me access and the freedom to start demonstrating leadership in that space. And I started taking it and running. And what I found was there is a thirst among educators to actually engage in real professional development. When I think about professional development in the typical sense, and I think many educators can resonate with this, it's either something that should have been sent to me in an email.
Hmm.
We don't need to spend 45 minutes talking about something that, you can just push out to me and I can just get it and keep it moving. Or the other experience that I've had a lot of times is some sort of third party outsourcing. And so the school, rather than looking at the internal intelligence and brilliance among their own staff, would send that professional development responsibility out to some third party. And then that third party, let's say middle America or somebody with a great PhD in this, that, or the other, would then deliver all of this best practice information. But then it's up to me to translate that information to my particular student population. So now I still have to do the heavy lift. So when we started having these conversations, and we're talking about critical conversations, conversations like technology in education, the use of cameras in the classroom. We talk about things like violence. There's been a serious uptick of teachers facing their own violence, let alone student to student violence. These were not the high level kinds of conversations, the critical conversations that were happening down at the level of the school site. And so the teachers started to flock, and they started to be committed to this experience where they finally had voice and could actually speak to the issues, the underlying issues that they were genuinely facing. And so at the time, because I had just decided to leave the classroom permanently, this was sort of my service to the community. And this was my own way of, let's say, psychologically coping with this transition in my career trajectory. So I just wanted to stay in the field. And after, the first season of this is when I realized, like, oh, wait a minute, maybe there's a market for this. And so in
Mhm.
that second season is when I started actually doing some market research, finding out if there was a viable revenue structure that could be made here. I started developing a basic website and securing some, the social media platforms and all of that, and just to see if there was anything really here. And it seemed to prove itself out. And so now that we're here in season 3, we are launching. We tackle the topics that people are too polite to touch, and the folks are still coming. And now we're actually launching and pushing out some of our content onto some of these broader social platforms, so that once again, in my previous experience where I wanted to go beyond the classroom, now I'm in a place where it's time to go beyond the app and try and bring in as many educators who are just as concerned about issues in education as I am, down to the educator's house, so that in a town hall style we can talk about it. And so I value having the degreed experts from the ivory towers coming down every once in a while to talk about their perspective of what's going on in education. The real thing that makes Educators House special is the town hall style, where if you're a classroom teacher or a school psychologist or a special educator, or the librarian or the principal, we can all come together at a level set and discuss and describe what's really happening on the front lines, because I think that's where the change is going to happen.
And it's impactful work thinking about we can go kind of grandiose in terms of ideas and things, as we dive and go into the world of technology, AI, all the intricate things that can be produced and focused on and kind of harnessed. But what I'm hearing from you is that you're practically implementing the use of technology, whether that's an app through social media, but using these things to actually tap into more of the human component, having these actual conversations, but rather than it be in a vacuum, you're able to open it up with the educator's house to where, I've been in your spaces where we have had consultations and conversations with educators across the globe. And the great equalizer and thing that basically allows us access to other individuals, other cultures to hear about, are the same concerns that educators in the U.S. have. Are those things apparent in other places, right? What's going on in Canada, the UK, on the continent of Africa, so on and so forth, and seeing that we found a lot of similarities. I know I have across those spaces, and the one thing that we have in common that allows us to do that is technology.
Hmm.
Even at the most base level is kind of where we are in society of using some of these audio and video conversation based platforms and structures and systems. So I think that that's extremely important. And I think that we can get really caught up in chasing this amazing, intricate, unicorn esque type of use case when if we really focus just on the practicality of it, the fact that you can talk to somebody in New Zealand just like that, right, is something that we shouldn't necessarily scoff at. But I think that we kind of overlook just even some of those things and how powerful and impactful that can be. So I definitely commend you on that because there's an understanding that especially in education, that there are going to be some overlaps and we can actually go even deeper because as educators, we like to say, we're lifelong learners.
Hmm.
And how do you do that? By engaging, by interacting, by interfacing, by networking. And I like to say that, networking is a contact sport, but even in this context, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the same space contact. It can be in the same virtual space contact, which we've seen great things kind of drive out of. Even, you and I coming into contact, we've actually never met in person. However, that doesn't stop the flow of information and communication and just the things that we're able to build on together. You don't have to be in here building chatbots and creating optimists and all that. You can leverage these tools and then figure out how we can do other things in addition to enhance, but start with where you are, right? And grow and then you can have an amazing community and initiative like the Educators House, where we're actually doing impactful work. What unique challenges have you faced in kind of building this out, and as you've been working outside of the confines of a school setting, infusing technology in these components, and how have you overcome some of those challenges?
It's interesting. A couple of things have come up for me in your share. One of them is my own trajectory, right? Talked about how it was really about using Google Classroom and Google Sheets and Google this and Google that. So that was really the first foray in terms of like technology, broadly speaking. Then moving into the social platforms. What I noticed about that phase change in my particular experience is the issue of human connection in the time where when I think about like the promise of email, right? It's like, why would you ever write on paper anymore and send something in a stamp and it would take 3 whole days to get to someone when you can write an email and it would get there in seconds? How much time you could save, what great quality of life you can have because of this great thing called the email. And now that we fast forward to where we are today, it seems like despite the fact that we've had so many advances in education on so many different fronts, at the same time, people have a feeling their own human experience is increased isolation, increased anxiety, a more difficult time connecting with other people. And so, moving forward to this phase, what I realize is how thirsty we are for human connection, how we don't really want to be in silos, despite the fantastic advantage, the fact that I'm here in studio, you're over there in studio, but it's the connection that we're able to create through the technology that makes this conversation so much more meaningful. And then when I think about what you mentioned in terms of the fact that now the globe is really very flat because of this technology. And so, yes, we've had conversations with people across the pond, right up there in Canada, down in South America. I've had educators from Brazil and other countries in South America join the Educators House and talk to us about their experience. And so, this idea that the globe is very flat, what it does is it creates a whole new way of thinking for us as educators who are fusing our experience as educators with entrepreneurship. And I think that's really a very powerful piece, which brings me to sort of this phase three. And I do think that when we look at how the landscape is changing because of the technology and because of the political landscape as well, there are many, 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 many teachers who are permanently deciding to leave traditional education altogether. Now, maybe they're going into educational technology, or maybe they're going into private education, doing workforce development training and becoming educators at the corporate level. Or maybe they're leaving altogether to work at Starbucks or to start their artistic career. Whatever it is, going back into the classroom just ain't worth it. And so, in this landscape where a citizen like me, as a solopreneur, can take my years of experience in the classroom, and with the advantage of things like artificial intelligence and the social media platforms that are out there, and the technology that's readily available, many of it at no cost or low cost. Now, I have the opportunity to do something that would typically take a much larger team in order to produce the kind of conferences and conversations that I have in the Educators House. And so it gives educators permission to think more imaginatively and more creatively about how I can intelligently use this information and my particular skill set and the tools and technology that's available to fuse something that the world has never seen before. And I think that's where the real exciting opportunities lie.
I want to lean into one thing in particular, one point about the human connection, because that's definitely a consideration when we're talking about technology, specifically the use case of AI when it comes to education and considering what's going on in classrooms. So I gotta
Mm.
ask you, I gotta ask you.
All right, here we go. Put my seatbelt on for this one.
I've been asked this before, so I gotta hear what you think.
Mm,
Will AI replace teachers?
mm. I'll start with the low hanging fruit. The old adage in our space is AI will not replace teachers, but teachers who use AI will replace teachers, right? So there is that. And that's worth a moment of silence. However, When I think about um, it's interesting because I'm taking this business course, and there's a concept. It doesn't totally apply, but I think you'll understand the visual, called a break-even point, where you have this increase of your expenses, and then you have this increase of your revenue, and there's a point where they intersect, where the revenue from the business will just enough to cover your expenses of the business, and that's your break-even point. There's a breaking point that I see in education as well, because as I mentioned, teachers, I mean, you talk about over the last 5 years, really since the pandemic, you're talking about record numbers of teachers year over year who are leaving and not coming back, and not always for the same reasons. That's on the one slope. And then on the other slope, you have the fact that these artificial intelligence large language models are getting better. It can't be denied, right? They are answering prompts better. The quality of the prompts don't have to be as good, so they're more accessible to lay people. So, yes, there is definitely going to be some critical mass or some intersection where these two things will cross. To answer the question about, a little bit beyond the near term, it's I'm going to go there. I'm going to go there. Why not? We're going there, right? Yes, I think in mass and generally speaking, AI will replace teachers. I do think that the advantage of having a readily accessible, generally compliant large language model that has information goes far beyond what any one human mind, regardless of their specialty, can handle. It just makes too much sense. Add to that the fact that now this tool, and especially the fact that it can learn and adapt to the prompter, can then individualize the experience to one student rather than, let's say, at the elementary level, 1 to 25, or at the high school level, into maybe 200 over the course of a 7-block day. Or at the university level, you could see a university hall packed with thousands of students at a time. That ratio can be reduced to 1 to 1 in a machine that's far beyond the human mind capable. I can't see how we could not, how many people would not take that as an opportunity to replace the teacher. At the same time, there is that issue of human connection, which is difficult to replace. There is something about proximity. And there is something about, let's call him Little Johnny. And Little Johnny is so smart. And in fact, he's too smart for my class. And so I have some behavior management problems with Little Johnny. He's got my heart, but boy, he's something else. What I've learned is when I'm on this side of the classroom and Johnny's over there with his friends, his behavior is very different than when I'm on that side of the classroom, right? So there is something about that human proximity that makes the experience very different than I am from what my experience, what wonders of the machine can provide. So even though from an academic or an intellectual perspective, I don't see how the human mind can compete with these large language models, there is something, that X factor about the human connection that can inspire, that can motivate, that can see the nonverbal cues and can adjust on the fly in a way that I just don't think a prompt can accomplish. So I do appreciate that. And at the same time, my second point, we've been prompting enough to know when that AI starts to hallucinate. And it be lying real good, okay? It will tell us things that are simply not factual or simply illogical with a level of confidence that I have to question myself. Like, is that true? Is that real? So the concern that I have when I put a tool like that, which is adaptive and mostly right, but sometimes when it's wrong, it's really wrong. I put it in the hands of a new learner rather than me who's at the synthesis level, right? But a person who's just getting their fundamentals down. I'm concerned about not only the algorithmic potential of a hallucination, but even the intentional design of manipulating young minds to move them in a certain way. I have very serious concerns about that. So I think there will be a fusion, but I don't see a future where having a personal AI tutor doesn't exist. So we're going to have to compete with this issue for sure.
Well, first of all,
Mhm.
I think I think you're officially the first person I've ever heard answer in the affirmative to that question.
Yeah.
I just want to say that.
Somebody got to be the first on the dance floor.
I mean, hey, I think there's some nuance to it, right, in terms of the conversation, because we're already seeing things like Conmigo, which we've
Hmm.
had conversations about, where you're beginning to see these AI technological teaching assistant types of tools and resources appear that the premise is essentially this thing is going to assist and help out the teacher with the kind of menial time consuming tasks, along with providing some supplemental support for students,
Hmm.
right, tutoring, if you will,
Yep.
in some capacity. But there's always the component of, well, what about the actual human engagement, kind of your little Johnny analogy there, and think about that. So it's interesting to kind of see those things, and begin to look at how some of it is panning out in real time. And I think that there's going to definitely need to be kind of an overhaul and a synthesis of what those experiences are looking like, and what the results are in a lot of those contexts. But I think that a lot of it, again, just like many of the things that we're getting into right now as it relates to using the technology, and AI, is so fresh and it's so new, at least to the masses, that we're like, we don't necessarily know, right? So
Right.
it's just a matter of like, well, what does the future entail? And it seems like every day the future just seems to be getting more rapidly near, I guess, in a way,
Hmm.
which is really interesting. So, look, thinking about systems, old structures like education in the U.S., in particular in this situation, it's interesting to kind of think and look at potential for what's going to happen there, and kind of considering certain things are going to definitely be inevitable, but
Right.
I think to what extent is a question. And you did mention one other piece there related to hallucinations and being experienced in using some of the tools, going into the chatbots and being able to realize based on replication and use, that okay, this thing is off its rocker. It's it's now hallucinating. This is not true. My question to you, related to educators who may not necessarily be as well versed in using some of the tools and resources, what recommendations or advice do you have, even for family members, adults, when it relates to supporting children or just access to this stuff? What recommendations, what advice do you offer as we are moving so rapidly in the space?
That's a powerful question. I'm going to take it. I want to respond to something you said earlier, and then I'll get to an advice. First, from an enterprise level, when it comes to the integration of AI tools and technology, I do see, just like the Titanic, it is a slow moving experience. So what I have seen is three major ways that a district or a university might approach the use of artificial intelligence. Both, and there's kind of two sides to the educational experience, which is using the tool in the hands of the professional and then putting the tool in the hands of the students, right? When I think about the tool in the hands of the professional, that's this side, many times the administrators and front facing educators love it. And I think this is where you're going to get your first levels of support at the enterprise level, at the 30,000-foot view, is making your job administratively easier. While we used to have the old Scantrons back in the day and the machine that would grade your stuff, right? That was a game changer. We didn't have to do it by hand. But what it has done, it has limited us in many ways, even today, down to a multiple choice option type style of questioning. And so by using artificial intelligence and these large language models, at least we can get back to doing more authentic assessment of students' mastery. And so I do think that from a professional side, that sort of administrative lift and the ability to have more interesting questions and more authentic assessment evaluation tools, I think that's a big game changer. So generally speaking, in the hands of the professional, I think that the enterprise level is going to be gung ho. The real question is about the students. And that's where we have to look at Freakonomics and where the incentives are. And so I have seen three major ways that universities or schools have made policies regarding student use cases. And that is either one, we're taking an all in approach. We want the teacher to encourage the students to use AI, use it in your classroom, use it on assignments, get them to prompt, go all in. Or option two, we don't trust this devil in a box. We have a no AI policy here. We believe in mind mapping, and we believe in students coming up with their own way of solving problems. And we want the students to do the heavy lift, right? This was the same argument we saw back in the calculator days. We saw it at the dawn of the internet days. And so here we are in artificial intelligence. And then the third option would be some fusion of the two. You can use it in this particular case, but not in that particular case. And we're going to kind of straddle the fence regarding AI. So I think that's what we're going to see from the large enterprise school district, from the national perspective. It's going to be that slow embracing, because there's just not, from their level, they're just too far away to see what's happening at the granular level. Then I think about homeschool. And I think you cited this to me, that in the Black community, we are leading the charge when it comes to moving our kids into a homeschool experience. And so on the granular level, where a parent who, like us, may not be professional educators, so they may not understand the pedagogy and the nuance and the scaffolding and all of those things. So leaning on to artificial intelligence, I think, could be a real tool. But we've already talked about some of the pros and cons regarding, the hallucination and then the overdependence on that kind of a tool. So from a homeschool perspective, there's pros and there's cons. So when it comes to now my advice, there are certain things that I think simply cannot be replaced, and that is proximity and priority. While we saw a large number of parents putting a telephone, whether it's an iPad or some other type of personal device, in the hands of pre-language toddlers, and we've seen how that has affected their brain development. I've seen video footage of students, of little children who are asleep and are still using their thumb to swipe, swipe, swipe unconsciously. So it is definitely affecting. We've seen students have full on meltdowns and tantrums when the parent tries to remove the device. And I don't think that is by accident. I think that these algorithm makers and these content creators are using color, sound, and the algorithm in terms of what's next to manipulate the brain in more of an addictive way. And so while social media, we've seen it have a negative impact, especially on our girls in the social media space, I can see these tools also having a negative impact. However, there is nothing quite like a child and a parent sitting together reading a story about pirates. And there's nothing that could replace a dad taking a cardboard box and making a pirate ship and creating an entire adventure between that child and their best friend, the parent. And so when I think about practical advice, whether you're a homeschooler or a classroom teacher, leveraging the tool, which takes us back to the old adage, right? The teacher who uses AI will replace the teacher that doesn't. So whether you're a parent teacher or a classroom teacher, if you use the tool to enhance your experience with the student, then I think you've got a real win, because you've got access to more information, but that connection, which cannot be replaced yet by the technology, is the thing that's really going to motivate. It's really going to inspire. It's really going to get you to ask more questions and ask questions more deeply. And so I think that part, rather than using the tool and saying, "Oh, here, little Johnny, Take this tool and leave me alone because I got to make my TikTok saying, here's the tool. I got the source. Now let us together explore this thing as a team. Then I think you've got a real winning combination.
Yeah, not the. I gotta create my TikTok. I'm sorry. Oh man, and yet I think it definitely resonates with me when you mention the kind of teaming up aspect of it, and also the fact that there is no replacement for that actual engagement in the space together. Because I'm thinking about even with my son, who's 4 years old at this point, we've definitely engaged using AI and some of the tools together and creating the stories where dinosaurs are very important in his
Yes,
life at this
sir.
point. And with that, it's like, all right, well, let's create a story, and you can audio prompt essentially, and say, hey, I'm going to create a story about dinosaurs, and this is the setting, and kind of laying out the structure of stories and how they are kind of framed, the setting, the characters, so on and so forth. But again, even in doing that, which is amazing and it's extremely enjoyable, and we read the story back, actually sitting down and opening a book.
Mm.
We recently just did the book fair, Scholastic or what have you, with through his school in pre-K, and sitting down with him and actually reading that book, right, reading these stories, um, in the same space together, and having that tangible artifact. I do see what you're saying in terms of there is no trade-off for that. That time together, and what that ultimately means, and also just the benefit of it. Having him pick up a book physically, whether he can read and comprehend what the words are saying or not, turning those pages and getting a feel for that, even within itself, is a whole nother thing.
So on the one hand, when I think about um, it on an enterprise level, the thing is there is a thing called the business of education. And so our very high director level, chief level folks are making decisions based on numbers, algorithms, and data. And when we look at it purely from a data perspective, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know what the answer is, those kinds of tools are just more efficient. They don't take sick days. They're relatively reliable. They're not going to bring in, all the human aspects, all of the messiness that makes us humans. And so at that high level, it just makes sense from a capital capacity perspective. And so I think there's going to be a real temptation to go with what's more efficient. And we've seen that trend, right? Grocery store, at the food mart, you got to click, click, click on your own because they're not hiring as many people. They let machines do as much of that work as possible. So to have machines come into the education space, I think is just going to be, again, from an enterprise level, it's going to be the right capital decision. At the same time, when I think about meaning making in your experience as a human to your child, or even an individual teacher to their kids, that meaning making experience, it can happen on the machine. But when I think about what's happening with that 4-year-old and how he's making meaning of the world by speaking into the bot and saying, I want to make a story about dinosaurs. And then there's this interaction between the child and the machine to create something out of the child's imagination down into a story that they can experience. That child is making meaning of the world through that experience. Now, if it is limited to them and the machine, because again, like we've seen with the phones, it can now be the babysitter, we'll see how that plays out over time. But what I can promise you is while the machine can also fire the endorphins and fire the dopamine and get the brain going, there's something about sitting in dad's lap, right? The feel of the whiskers on his forehead, and dad and I doing that together. He's also firing endorphins, getting that serotonin, getting that dopamine experience, but it's happening in a way that I think is drastically different. So while the chemicals might still be firing, the experience between that child and the machine and the experience between that child and the parent are two very different things. And I think the pathways that play out are going to end up in very different places. So I just wanted to add that, but let's continue. I'm sorry.
Well, of course, no, not a problem. And yeah, I appreciate those highlights because again, it's really about experience,
Hmm.
um, and how we engage with things. Because you can get to a point where too much of something, of course, is going to be detrimental to you.
Right.
But to your point about kind of finding that balance, right? That point of cross convergence, if you will, it's difficult to do. I think, especially when we're talking about educating and providing information, but also remaining human and having interaction and relationships be a part of that because it's necessary. I think that there is still a lot of work to be done. I think in that aspect because again, we it's the wild wild west when it comes to a lot of this stuff. We don't know necessarily what's going on. We don't know what the upside really is. We don't really know what the downside ultimately will be.
Hmm.
We see what's happening right now. We can kind of make a prediction, but we don't necessarily know. So we can only control what we can control.
Right. And a lot of that landscape hasn't been painted. So we also have the opportunity to paint part of that story too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that that's the beautiful part about it because younger people are going to be the ones holding the brushes.
Mm,
It's not us. We can kind of lay out the canvas, but what you end up producing and creating at the end of all this, when it's said and done, it's probably going to be well beyond me. And in thinking about my son, the children in schools, here is the tool. I'm going to help you as far as I know, but they're going to, we see it, right? They children take things and they just run,
run.
and we're like, wait, how did you do? What can you teach me how to?
Right,
All
right,
those
right.
things.
Yeah.
That's the nature of it. That's where things are going, and I think that it's important, even in reflection about educators, and again, kind of thinking about the work that you're doing within the educator's house, informing people, providing opportunity, space for conversations, for interactions, for relationship building, and also infusing components like technology and AI based emphasis. Like, how are you seeing the shifts happening with the folks that you're speaking to within your programs and your initiatives under that brand that you're building, and the intersectionality when we talk about technology, whether that's a school context, homeschool, what have you?
Hmm. I'll share two stories of folks who have come through the house. On the one hand, I have my friend Nona. Nona is a former educator and comes into the space and has a care for the students. Her thing is this sort of technology is going to disrupt that meaning making process. And the more that we put these tools in the hands of our young minds, then it creates a level of dependency. And let's also keep in mind these are private companies, right? This isn't some utility ran by the government for the public good, right? OpenAI is a private corporation, which means they can, it doesn't make business sense, but they can pull the plug whenever they want, right? They can take that data and wipe your account or whatever that may look like. So her concern is we need to continue to teach students how to make fire from flint. We need to make sure that they have deep fundamental skills. Is on the one side, and a fellow educator. Then on the other side, I have Courtney. Courtney is a professional artist and an art educator, has been for her entire teaching career. Courtney is all in, my bro. She is AI everything. And so when these two get into the room, boy, the conference be getting hot, okay? But she doesn't see a future without this. And her thing is, if I don't introduce artificial intelligence and the capacity to my students, I'm in fact doing them a disservice
Mm.
because the future economy, which we're going to retire out of, but of which they are going to be in their prime, is going to include these kinds of tools. And so if I, as the teacher, as the facilitator of learning, while I have them, if I don't get them hip to the game, then they're going to be not just behind the eight ball, as you mentioned, but way behind. And so she feels it is actually her duty, her ethical responsibility to bring artificial intelligence in, allow them to play around with it, to maybe make some mistakes, maybe even cheat on their history test or have it write the social studies paper. Like those are going to be the risks involved, and we've all done it, right? We all fail forward. But she embraces that as part of the process and understands that in the end, this is going to be one of those fundamental tools that we just can't not do. And so I see teachers on both sides of the extreme when it comes to the use of artificial intelligence, using it in the classroom, putting it in the hands of the students. Some outstanding questions still involve, like, what age is appropriate? Some say, let a kid have a no technology experience all the way to, 10 years old, 12 years old, 14 years old. Some say don't even give the child a cell phone until they turn 16 and they're old enough to do certain things, right? And then there are others who say it needs to be integrated because this is it. So there's so many outstanding questions still, and we are not a monolith when it comes to the approach. And so I've seen it all, my brother. I've seen it all.
Well, yeah, and I definitely can understand the vantage point of both
Hmm.
of those stories you share. Like I definitely see both sides of that. And what I find is I think it's really important for us, especially as educators, to try to find as much of that middle ground as we can, and be able to educate and share both sides of that coin,
Hmm.
and let people know, well, this is what's happening over here, but also this is what's happening over here, and create an awareness, which I think is the most, I guess, responsible way to go about a lot of this, because you're going to have folks on either side, and us both being in chemistry, we understand equilibrium, right?
Hmm.
Like if you don't necessarily have that balance, of equations, in a way, then of course one side is going to kind of weigh a little heavier than the other, and then you're going to get a little bit more of that side of things, and it's like, well, that's not necessarily favorable for us in the long run. So how do we regulate that, which is a whole nother question and concern.
And we've seen that problem in the social media space. We are the generation that had access to smartphones in high school. I don't know how old you are, but I'm a little too old for that. But now there's a whole generation that has passed of students who had access to smartphones in the middle school and now have grown up and they have kids. And so we have seen the problems with not being diligent about this. It was just a tool and it was awesome and you could swipe and you can see cat videos and the whole bit. What we didn't understand was the collateral damage or the unintended consequences of things like cyberbullying. There was no cyberbullying. Back in my day, it was about dare. Now the whole concept of bullying has evolved into this whole new thing. And so new things, new problems will emerge as we embrace the technology. The other thing that came up is not only is there that main middle where most of us will be, right? A little bit, but not too much, some free time, right? But you're also going to have those parents on the extreme, those parents who say, I'm all in, and those parents who say, I'm all out. And so I think that sort of natural bell curve is going to give us enough data. The main thing is, are we having the conversations? Are we talking about what's going on so that we can get ourselves to the ultimate right way of doing this?
Yeah, and I mean we've kind of run the gamut, I think, in terms of uh, conversations around what we're looking at it and seeing in education, a lot of the tools, resources, answering some of these questions that I've heard pretty consistently within the education space, industry, sector, amongst our peers. And I think I want to get to a point now where we're going to go ahead and get to our closing kind of
Hmm.
questions. The one thing I really want to know from you, Hassan, and this can be, I don't want to put you into a box. So I want to open up space for you to be able to talk. Thinking about your work, whether that's specifically the Educator's House, and what you're building there, or just your initiatives and what you're doing at large. First, in the lens of tech and AI, what legacy do you hope to leave as it pertains to that? And then I also want to open it up more broad, right? And just think about legacy in general, as we're talking about narrative. And I want to hear a little bit about, what do you intend to leave, on a grander scale, even if it's not necessarily so much correlated and related to the tech space per se.
About legacy, I think about what happened at the end of slavery. And back then, when slavery was air quotes abolished and we were emancipated, there was this significant rush of African Americans who moved into politics. They moved into public office. They began to become influencers. You started to see the rise of Black cities. It was a golden era post slavery. But then you saw the rise of the Ku Klux Klan and all those other things, right? But before all of that negativity, there was this moment where Black people were really ready to be free. When I think about legacy and the moment that we're facing now, in some kind of a way, I can't say that I know what that experience was like, but in some kind of a way, I see that same sort of opportunity present itself now. What the technology and tools like artificial intelligence do, in my humble point of view, is they level the playing field in a way that we haven't seen in many generations. So for me, when I think about the legacy, when I think about what my grandchildren's grandchildren will be saying about great, great, great old granddad, I want them to say he put himself out there. He was on the front lines. He was one of the very few Black owned education businesses leveraging the technology to get his point of view out to the world, and he made an impact. Like you said, maybe it's all a wash. Maybe it'll be like Dogecoin, find its way back down to near zero, right? Maybe. Or just maybe this will be that to continue the analogy, that Bitcoin, that thing that large institutions are still continuing to use and evolve, and maybe it'll become a thing. I don't know. But what I do want them to say is he went for it. And that I think would be the most important thing. I decided when it was a moment, and I'll close with this and go to the next part. When I decided to leave the classroom in that moment, that was a critical moment. I could play it safe. I could get my check. I know when vacation time is coming. I got my Thanksgiving break. I got my spring break. I got summer. I got Christmas. It's stable. It's predictable. I got it. Or I could take this big risk, take my little savings and try this little business idea and see just what might turn out. And in the end, who knows? Maybe I'll end up back in the classroom and say I gave it the old college try. Or maybe, just maybe, I can make a national and international impact on education. I've got a 4-year goal. I want to interview the next 2 major presidential candidates, because when I saw all these debates, what I didn't see was any significant conversation about education. Well, if not them, then choose me, coach. Put me in the game. So I've given myself a 4-year time span, bro. And from now until 4 years from now, I'm going to work my darndest to put out as much high quality content, to push the conversation as boldly and courageously as possible, such that in 4 years' time, when those top 2 candidates are getting down to it and we're getting almost time to vote like we are right now, mark your calendars, I want to put myself and my business in a position that these 2 candidates are going to come to me and we're going to talk about it. So if I can get to that point, then I'll call it a dub, my bro. What was the other part? I'm sorry, I got caught up.
No, you might have. You might have kind of, I think, overlapped and even answered, because I was thinking about, of course, thinking about the tech aspect of it, and then broader scope in terms of that legacy. But I feel like you kind of went there,
Yeah.
completely. Even with the 4-year plan and thinking broader scope, this has really not much to do with AI technology, but even going into influence and impact in the world that you want to have and see within the span of your life, and talking about that legacy of your grandchildren's grandchildren, which I don't necessarily know that a lot of people actually really sit and ponder over,
Mm.
which I think is really valuable.
In terms of my use, right? And this might be of value to anybody who's like me, ready to take that risk. The use cases, the value of artificial intelligence in particular. There are plenty other technologies out there, but when I think about a large language model and what it's doing for my business, I can tell you very clearly, I lean on it quite heavily. So all of my images that are on the website are intentionally all generated by an artificial intelligence machine. So I'll enter some prompts and it might take some magic to try to get it where I need it to go. But I want people to have an experience when they come to the website where they know, oh, that was generated by AI, but it gives me the opportunity to customize the image to that particular conference, right? When it comes to my research, I'm not using Google anymore. I send all of my prompts to an AI generator and we get down into it. Now, I might verify and validate that information, but I'm asking a series of questions. I'm asking it to give me lists. I am taking metacognitive steps back and saying, okay, for example, I will say, give me a script for the invitation to the next conference. And it will give me this very nice vanilla version. And then I'll take it and I'll put the Husan spice on it. What's that thing that Devana does? What's the name of her chatbot?
It
The
girl GPT.
It Girl, right? I'll put my little It Boy on it, so I'll spice it up and then I'll put it back into the large language model and say, this is what I did to what you gave me. Now compare what you did to what I did. What do you think? And then it'll give me some meaningful feedback, right? That I'm giving back to the machine so that I can say the next time you generate something, try to do it more closely aligned with my particular writing style. So I use it not only as a research tool, but it helps me develop content. It helps write my scripts, all of that. And then once I finish the conference and I'm cutting those tools up, I haven't done it yet, but my intention is to use an artificial intelligent driven editing machine to take that and chop it up on my behalf, right? And so then I can take that content and push it out to the social media. When I push it out to social media, AI is also helping me with the copywriting. So what should I put into the caption of Instagram, and how should that copy be different than what I put on LinkedIn? So now we've got to analyze these two audiences and my demographics there. So I'm using it there and coming up with new copywriting, new hashtags, right? New emojis that go with it. And so all throughout my workflow process, from the beginning research to the conference, all the way to the live conference, and then after the live conference, using it in the post editing and the post production to get it back out to the broader community, AI is involved in so many steps. And again, this is a solopreneur venture. And so if there's anybody out there that has a bright idea of something that they haven't seen in the marketplace before, I can promise you artificial intelligence and these large language models can turn a solopreneur into an actual business. Now, it doesn't mean that you can gloss over what it means to run a business, right? There's a big difference I've learned between a passion project and a revenue generating business. But in terms of the workflow, in terms of the products that you can create, in terms of the things that you learn along the way that make it easier, my bro, AI is all over the educator's house.
Yeah, there's so much that I think that you've offered us, and I'm gonna go back and rewatch this episode and see what I can take from it. But Husan, man, I really appreciate you taking the time to join in this initiative, to be a part of this, to be on the road to 100 with us and share your insights, share your story, share the work that you're doing with the Educator's House and even beyond, all these stories related to, being a father, educator. I appreciate it. So as we close out, I really want you to just go ahead and take some time really quickly to tell people, where can they get in touch with you? Where can they see your work? Where are we going to follow up with what you got going on, and how can we engage in support?
I appreciate that. I will start by saying I was really nervous. I mentioned it to you, but the idea that I was selected to be part of this road to 100 is really an honor. And so I thank you for allowing me to share my story with your community so that we can try to get this narrative locked in. When it comes to following up with me, you can go to the website, educatorshouse.com. I am on Instagram, Educators House, technically educators.house. I have a LinkedIn page as well. And and you can also check me out on YouTube. So those are going to be the main platforms upon which a consumer can check out what's going on with the Educators House and find out if it's resonant with them. If it is resonant, then you can look into joining as a member. So we have opportunities for folks to actually join the house formally, where they can then participate and let their voice be part of what we're doing. Or you can subscribe and receive that content. This content is not just for entertainment purposes, but our explicit goal is to inform and empower those frontline educators to know that the things that they're experiencing, you're not alone. We are a community of educators. We are in this together, and we're going to fight the battle, even if those who are higher up in the bureaucracy are too polite to tackle the real issues. But when you go into your local school board meeting, your faculty development, your PD, now you've got some information that you can bring with you to really push your local community and start making impact on the ground level. That's what we're all about. And if that's interesting to you, join us over at educatorshouse.com and get all the details there.
Hassan, again, greatly appreciate you taking the time. Definitely tap in with Hassan in Educator's House and everything that he has going on. And again, we look forward to having everybody back for the next edition of Narrative, The Road to 100 with Black AI Media. I'm Cedric Scott Jr. Until next time, peace and love.